Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of session 10 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are now talking about one of the most famous problems in epistemology called the Meno problem, and it comes up right in the middle of the Meno. The beginning of the Meno, which we already discussed, addresses one of these what is X questions. What is virtue in this case? And we saw a couple of ways in which you can fail to give an adequate reply to this kind of question. The first type of problematic answer that we discussed was that in response to a what is X question, someone just gives an example of X. And then, then the criticism is, well, you gave me an instance of X, but not what X is. The second type of problem that we discussed was that someone could say something about how X is. For example, virtue is teachable, as opposed to saying what X is. For example, what virtue is. The third kind of problem that we saw was that someone could mention a part of X as opposed to X. So in our case, that was that Meno seemed to be talking about justice, and justice could be part of virtue rather than virtue. So those are some of the ways in which one can fail to give an adequate reply to a what is X question. And at that point in the dialogue, Meno finds himself kind of giving up. And the technical term that comes up in Plato for that state of mind is aporia, perplexity. The thought is that, you have explored a couple of routes of inquiry, and then you just no longer know what you could possibly explore, and you kind of throw up your hands and find yourself confused. And at that point, Meno formulates like a really famous problem, which is a perennial problem in epistemology. He says, well, how does inquiry, investigation or inquiry work at all? Because either you know something, and then you don't have to look for it, or you don't know it. And then how would you even look for it? Because in order to look for something, you kind of have to put it in some way in front of your mind. And presumably you can't do that because you don't know it. And also, if you're looking for it, you have to recognize it. But if you don't know what it is you're looking for, how would you recognize it? So, put really simply, the thought is there are two options. Either you know something or you don't know it. If you know it already, you don't have to look for it. You don't have to inquire into it. If you don't know it, you can't inquire into it because you don't know what you're looking for. Now, kind of a side remark, one thing that is not so often mentioned about the Meno problem is that the way it is phrased makes it seem as if we talk about kind of objects that we are looking for. Like you think, I tell you, could you fetch my glasses from the office? And then you say, but I don't know what your glasses look like, so I can't look for them. That's kind of how it is formulated, as if we were looking for an object. But on the other hand, you might think that's not how knowledge or inquiry typically works. Typically, knowledge is, to understand something, or is in some way propositional knowledge, not, as we said, kind of knowledge of an object. Knowing my glasses. Rather, it would seem if you inquire into something you want to know, for example, what virtue is, and that would seem to be to know a theory or an account. And that would seem to be what philosophers tend to call propositional knowledge. So that is a confusing and interesting feature of the Meno problem that I would like you to think more about. But for now, I want to focus on the first two potential solutions to the problem that Socrates entertains. And it is important to realize that those are not simply like solutions. Those are suggestions for what might work as a solution. And the first of these is incredibly famous and has been super influential in the history of philosophy. It's called the Anamnesis or Recollection. And now comes a contested question. whether you're going to say anamnesis or recollection, theory or story. Because Socrates says, well, here's something that the priests and priestesses tell me. So literally, we get the story, but we get a story from people who are, very, very highly regarded, priests and priestesses and divine poets. So the story is that the soul, prior to being born in a body, has seen all things. And then once it is embodied, born in a body, and it recollects something, then, because all of nature is akin, so because there are connections between everything, once you have recollected something, you can sort of bit by bit recollect everything. And that could be one way in which we can investigate. It would be sort of like a way out of the dichotomy of either you know something and you just sort of already know it so you don't have to investigate, or you simply plainly don't know it. Rather, it would be some kind of in-between thing. You would have so-called latent knowledge. Knowledge in the mind that is not presently occurrent for you, presently accessible to you, but you could recollect it. So that is a really, really influential idea. But Socrates says, well, the only thing that I kind of am really committed to is that we shouldn't be lazy. And this argument of yours, Meno, that you brought forward, that, inquiry is impossible, is a lazy argument. And that is actually like a technical term in Greek thought, that certain arguments have an upshot that you like if you want to be lazy. So the argument that inquiry is impossible is a lazy argument because, if you accept it, you can sort of just go home and you don't have to put any work into inquiry anymore. And that is the thing that Socrates says he's invested in. So it's quite unclear whether Socrates endorses the recollection story/theory. So for today, the little kind of puzzle and homework assignment that I want to give you is just to think for yourself what you think is a prerequisite or precondition for the ability to inquire into something. Let's again call it X. And here are some options. One option would be, well, in order to be able to inquire into X, we need inborn ideas, the kind of thing that the recollection story is about. The second option would be that we need beliefs about X. That is an option that doesn't come up so far. The third option is that you need the concept X. And the fourth option is that you need the ability to phrase a question about X. So those are the four options. And I would like you to come up with a view on which, either one or several of them you think are necessary prerequisites for inquiry into X.